Greetings, loyal subjects. Today we want to talk about Moseley Old Hall in Staffordshire. It is a National Trust site and it is famed as one of the locations that Charles II stayed in after his defeat at the Battle of Worcester before his ultimate escape over to France. It was built around about the year 1600 by a guy called Henry Pitt, who was a Catholic. And just like nearby Boscobel House, where Charles had initially stayed, it was in the middle of dense woodland, which made it great for hiding out. Priest holes were installed in the location, which was fantastic for Charles because it meant that he had somewhere to hide in case the parliamentarian forces turned up. So it was proved to be. So what are the 5 unmissable sites at Moseley Old Hall? Well, the first site is the King's Door. Charles was brought here on the 8th of September 1651. There aren't actually many doors in the country that a king has described, but he described this one to Samuel Pepys, the diarist. He said it was 3 planks wide and heavily studded. That door still remains today. It was the servants' entrance of Moseley Old Hall. And it was through that door that King Charles II was escorted into safety. The second thing to see is the servants' stairs. They are incredibly steep. In fact, there's a sign at the top saying, "Don't attempt to come down them." I wouldn't have fancied that at all, trust me, with my royal stature. So Charles came through the door and up the stairs. And then he went into what was the priest's bedroom. And that's the third thing that you want to see. Because ultimately, that has now become known as the King's Room. Because this is where Charles stayed during his visit to Moseley. Now the priest, Father Hubbard, he took one look at the king, and the first thing he did was bathe his feet. Charles had been heavily disguised at Boscobel. He'd had his haircut, soot put on his face, and he was given working man's clothes, including some boots that didn't really fit him. So when he arrived at Moseley Old Hall, his feet were effectively cut to ribbons. The priest bathed Charles's feet and ultimately actually saved his life in many ways because they stopped the king's feet from being infected. And you can see in that king's room the bed that Charles II then rested in after his feet had been attended to. I got told a funny story when I was there, in that subsequently notable guests had been allowed to lie on the bed after Charles II had been restored to the throne. Apparently no less than 3 British Prime Ministers have done so. Who they were, I have no idea. The fourth thing to see is, of course, the priest hole. That is just off from the King's Room. Charles II was forced to take up residence in the priest hole when parliamentarian forces arrived outside. The owners of the house managed to persuade them that the king had not been seen and they weren't part of the royalist forces at all, and so the parliamentarian troops moved on. All of this time, Charles II was sheltering in that priest hole. And you can see that it isn't very big. Remember, Charles II was 6'2". He was a tall man, so it wouldn't have been comfortable in there. You can see the original trapdoor that the king himself would have lifted into place and bolted from the inside. And the final thing that you don't want to miss in this location is the letter from Charles II to Jane Lane. Jane was the woman that accompanied Charles from Moseley Old Hall all the way over the country at the numerous stops he made till he managed to flee to France, and Charles pretended to be her servant. This is a handwritten letter from the king to Jane expressing his gratitude. So is it worth visiting Moseley Old Hall? Of course, it's a very atmospheric old building with a great story to tell. Probably best paired up with a visit to Boscobel House. Just remember that Moseley Old Hall is operated by the National Trust. Boscobel House is operated by English Heritage, so if you wanted to get in free to both, you would need a membership for both. But yeah, definitely a site worth visiting and just reliving some of these fantastic stories. I mean, the story of Charles II's escape after the Worcester is one of the iconic stories from English history.